So you may look at this on the surface and say, wow, that is not a good poll for Trump, except when you look at when this poll was conducted, you would think, okay, they released it yesterday. It must have been pretty recent, right? Like Fox News, the one they released yesterday was conducted only 2 days before that, except this poll, folks, was conducted from July 26th to August 2nd. All right, folks, I want to talk about some of the polls today because there is ample evidence that the honeymoon phase is already starting to fade out for Kamala Harris, right? Trump is regaining much of his ground in some of the polls we've seen this week. But on top of that, I also want to address the question of what exactly has been going on with the polls for the last couple of weeks, because of course, the Kamala supporters are going to say the polls are real, Trump is coping, but the Trump supporters are either saying that the polls are fake and astroturfed, or they're saying it's not necessarily that, but you're seeing heavy levels of summer response bias, which is a historical trend that long predates this election cycle, right? It always happens where around this time of the year, the polls vastly overestimate and oversample the Democrats, and then later on after Labor Day, they start to come back to reality. So is it that? Are the polls real? Are they fake? What should we think of them? We'll talk about all of it in today's video. So folks, if you enjoy the content, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you are new. But that said, let's just start from the top by talking about, like I said, polls that came out yesterday showing Trump doing much better than the ones you've seen in the past couple of weeks. So one example here, and I'm sure many of you guys saw this, is the Fox poll that came out yesterday that showed Trump obviously leading by 1 point nationally over Kamala Harris. He had a decent margin there with independent voters. And of course, the counter argument will always be, oh, but it's Fox News. Of course, it's gonna favor Trump. But of course, anyone familiar with the history of the Fox News poll would know that that is not necessarily true. There are many instances in which Fox actually overestimated the Democrats. They have an independent firm that conducts their polling for them. But on the grounds of whether or not we should trust this poll, one reason I say is because the sample here does not seem to be ridiculously and unrealistically screwed up like many of the other ones we've seen recently. Because when you break down the individual responses here, obviously they ask, regardless of how you might vote, who do you trust to do a better job on each of the following? And on the economy, Trump has a lead of 6 points. On border security, he leads by 19. Immigration, he leads by 14. But then on the flip side, Kamala Harris beats Trump on abortion by 16 points, healthcare by 10 points, guns is basically tied. Trump has a lead of 7 on foreign policy, 5 on crime, and Kamala Harris leads by 18 on the issue of climate change. To me, that seems realistic, right? That's basically what you would expect or intuitively think is going on here with the electorate. And so that's one of the reasons I say you can't just entirely write it off because it's Fox News. To me, that actually seems a bit more realistic than what we've seen from other pollsters as of late. But similarly, Pew Research released a poll yesterday that had Harris beating Trump by 1 point nationally. And let's remind ourselves, if she only wins the popular vote by 1 point, that means Trump is winning the electoral college, right? So that is not a bad margin, certainly better than some of the ones we've seen in the past couple of weeks. And then a Daily Mail poll that came out yesterday also had Trump leading Kamala Harris by 2. And we also had a bipartisan Michigan poll from the AARP that had Trump and Harris tied in Michigan. And then when it's broken down with the other candidates, Trump here actually leads by 2. So obviously no single individual poll actually tells the story of what is necessarily happening in the election. Obviously there can be error, but the trend we're seeing again yesterday and today, a bunch of polls dropping that all of a sudden show Trump either winning or much closer to Kamala than before. That seems to suggest, and as you can see here, Rasmussen showed Kamala Harris dropping by 3 points and Trump gaining by 1 from about the end of July here. The overall trend we seem to be seeing again is Trump is narrowing the gap, and as we expect, maybe we expect to be true here, the Kamala Harris honeymoon again starting to fade out a little bit. Now with that said though, I do have to address the elephant in the room, which is the overall state of polling that you've seen ever since Kamala Harris became the candidate, because obviously the past couple weeks, some polls are being released that show Kamala ridiculously out in front. Oh, look, Trump is collapsing, all this different stuff. And of course, the obvious response is going to be, oh, Vince, you're just mad because Trump is losing in the polls. But when you actually break it down, and I may provide you some proof of it here today, it seems to be obvious that there is serious malpractice that is going on in some of this polling that suggests that Kamala Harris is way out in front. And I'm obviously not going to say that without evidence, right? I'm not just saying, oh, they're fake because I don't like them. I'll show you a couple examples of that. So yesterday, which is obviously on the same day that the Fox News and all these other polls came out, Cook Political released their swing state polling survey. And look at what this shows. Obviously, Kamala Harris way out in front in regards to the election. She's leading Pennsylvania by 5, Michigan by 2, Wisconsin by 5. She's even winning North Carolina and Arizona. Georgia's tied, etc., etc. So you may look at this on the surface and say, wow, that is not a good poll for Trump, except when you look at when this poll was conducted, you would think, okay, they released it yesterday. It must have been pretty recent, right? Like Fox News, the one they released yesterday was conducted only 2 days before that, except this poll, folks, was conducted from July 26th to August 2nd. That's right. The data here that they sampled is almost 3 weeks old, but they waited until yesterday to release it. And you may be asking, what exactly is the motive there? Well, what I see there is pure political malpractice, because you cannot just release a poll that is weeks old and say, oh, look, it's brand new. But isn't it also just hilarious that coincidentally, quote unquote, coincidentally, Cook Political holds on to this data for several weeks and waits until the exact same day that many favorable polls come out for Trump to suddenly release this and pretend like it's up to date. What do I see going on there? They are intentionally trying to mess with the aggregate, right? Because they obviously know that yesterday showed Trump, hey, look, he's going up in the polling aggregate, so let's release this on the very same day so that way, hey, he can go down again and then it can balance out. Like, that is not a right way to conduct this. And that is, again, a reason I say, no, it's not just cope. There is political malpractice going on here, because you can't just release an old poll and pretend like it's a new poll, right? And that also begs the certainly odd question of why it feels like in the past week before yesterday, there was a slowdown of national polls, right? Because the first couple weeks when Kamala was a candidate, it felt like there were polls coming out every single day, but suddenly they stopped. Where are the polls? Well, maybe they're finding, right, that the polls are starting to come back down to reality and they don't want to release them because they want to show Kamala Harris out ahead. I don't know. That is a little bit of speculation, but here is yet another example of the malpractice that I'm talking about in the polls. So today, Emerson College released a poll that showed nationally Kamala Harris is up 4 points over Trump, and you read that and you say, okay, that is a bad poll for Trump. Except when you break down how the data here was actually collected. So check this out. In July, they had Trump +4, and the survey that they did here was 44% of the voters were reached by an online panel, right? They were contacted by the internet to participate in this poll. 24% were contacted on landlines, and 31% were conducted by mobile phone. And again, that poll had Trump up by 4. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, a month later, when the poll swings 8 points for Kamala Harris, check out their frequency here. So they had 67.2% contacted by online panels. So 23% more of the voter sample here was contacted by the internet in regards to the last poll, only 9.8% from landlines, and only 23% contacted by mobile phone. So like straight up here, as you can see, they changed their entire polling methodology in the span of a month. They didn't explain why. They obviously skewed the method to favor the Democrats, because obviously the more you contact online, it's probably a younger sample, etc., etc. And then all of a sudden, hey, look, Kamala Harris swung 8 points in her favor. No, that's not how that works, right? You can't just change the way you conduct your poll overnight and then say, oh, look, the same poll is now showing Harris +4. no, this is a fundamentally different poll. And again, that suggests to me pure malpractice. You can't just change your methodology for no reason and then not explain why and then just try to say, oh, look, now Kamala Harris is winning. Not a good look overall. And that's why I say again, I'm not just standing here telling you the polls are fake. I'm actually reading into them and seeing, look, they conducted the poll totally differently, right? It doesn't even make any sense. Here is yet another example from YouGov. So their general election poll this week has Harris beating Trump by 2 points. And this is the third straight week that YouGov has had Harris +2, except again, the sample here is totally screwed up from their past ones, because last week this poll had a sample of D+6, which essentially means there were 6 points more Democrats who were asked questions here than Republicans. So already one could say maybe that sample is a little bit skewed, but in comparison to last week, this week, the poll is D+10, and yet it still only has Harris up by 2. So you can read this on the surface and say, oh wow, last week was Harris +2, this week is Harris +2. She's really solidifying her lead there. But when you actually read into it, actually, if anything, that suggests she lost some ground, because this electorate is more Democrat leaning. This sample is more liberal than the last one, but it still has Harris +2. But again, it begs the greater question here. What is going on with the sampling? It is totally all over the place. These pollsters are changing their methods. They're withholding data until weeks later to release it. The whole thing is entirely shady. And that's why I say, look, it's going to be a close election. I'm not coping and just going to say, oh, look, we're winning, we should believe that. But there is genuine and legitimate reason to believe some of what you're seeing from the pollsters in the past couple of weeks has not entirely been accurate. And there are some grounds to suggest that maybe straight up malpractice is going on right now. And so when you weigh that in with also the combined fact that, hey, some of the other polls are showing Trump doing better, Kamala Harris is losing ground, I'm not saying to panic, right? It's going to be a close election regardless, and we should always treat it like that. But maybe we're doing a little bit better than the national media is trying to tell us we are. That said, folks, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.